The Velkashan didn't shake hands. I found that out on the first morning, when I offered mine to the registrar, and she looked at it the way you'd look at a stain on a lab bench. "Exchange student Delgado," she said, not touching me. "Your quarters are on level 14. Access credentials have been uploaded to your cortical relay." "I don't have a cortical relay," I said. "I've got a notebook." She paused, said level 14 again, as if repetition might fix whatever was wrong with me. Then she went back to her console. I found my room. Clean, white, smooth. Everything on Velkash Station was smooth. The walls, the corridors, the people. The Velkashian had skin like glazed ceramic, pale and hairless, with faint lavender veins just visible beneath the surface when the overhead light caught them right. They were taller than me by a head, and they moved with the kind of exact, unhurried economy that suggested their entire species had evolved past the need to rush for anything. I started introducing myself that afternoon. The reactions were consistent. "Why?" asked the laboratory coordinator on level 11, whose name I learned was Xenothis. "Because I'm going to be here for 6 months," I said, and it seemed polite. Xenothis looked at me for a long moment, decided I wasn't malfunctioning, and returned to her screen. I wrote her name in my notebook and moved on. By the end of the first week, I'd introduced myself to 41 Velkashian across 8 levels of the Institute of Applied Sciences: researchers, lab assistants, archive clerks, custodial technicians, meal service staff, the 2 security officers who rotated the North Corridor watch, and a maintenance engineer named Drenvoth who serviced atmospheric recyclers, and who, based on his reaction to being spoken to, hadn't been addressed socially since the station was commissioned. He'd stared at me for a good 10 seconds. "You are the human," he said. "Tomas," I said. "I know," he said. "You are the one who talks." That, I gathered, was my reputation. The one who talks. It was not, in a Velkashan academic context, a term of admiration. The institute ran on a principle the Velkashan called jurisdictional isolation. Each of its 14 departments maintained its own research agenda, its own resource pipelines, its own communication channels. If you needed something from a colleague 2 floors away, you submitted a request for interdepartmental resource allocation, Form 7 Theta, countersigned by your section coordinator and reviewed by a standing committee that met once every 9-day cycle. If the committee approved, your request was forwarded to the other department's coordinator. If that coordinator approved, you received a response. Average turnaround, 11 days. I learned all of this when I tried to borrow a calibration spectrograph from the materials lab. The structural analysis coordinator told me to file the form. I asked if I could just go down and ask. She looked at me the way the registrar had looked at my hand. So I filed the form, and then I walked down to the materials lab and introduced myself to the people who worked there. "You're the one who talks," said the senior technician, Kalendris, stocky for a Velkashan, which still put him at 6'2". He had the calm, flat tone that I was learning meant amusement without any interest in showing it. "Getting around," I said. Kalendris didn't lend me the spectrograph. Protocol was protocol. But he explained why cross-departmental conversation was considered what he called extraneous. Not forbidden, just extraneous. The system didn't account for it, so it didn't happen. And because it didn't happen, the system didn't account for it. A closed loop so elegant it was almost beautiful. I kept saying hello anyway. One morning I stopped by the archive on level 8 to ask the clerk, Prasoth Yan, cataloger 2nd class, whether she'd had a good rest cycle. She set down her datapad and looked at me with an expression I can only describe as clinical curiosity. "Why do you ask that?" she said. "Just curious," I said. "You are always curious about things that have no informational yield." "Most things don't, until they do." She picked her datapad back up. I added her name to the notebook. By the end of the 2nd month, I could walk from level 3 to level 16, and greet most of the people I passed by name. The Velkashan noticed. They found it baffling in the way you'd find baffling a man who insisted on walking to work backwards. Not offensive, not dangerous, just inexplicable. At a bi-weekly orientation review in the third month, my academic supervisor, Prefect Anil Shev, raised it formally. Your social output metrics are significantly elevated relative to any exchange student in the program's history, she said. She had her console open. There was a graph. Is this a pathology? It's called making friends, I said. With custodial technicians. With everyone. She noted something on her console, probably filed it under extraneous. The crisis, when it arrived, had nothing to do with me, or so I thought. Two of the Institute's largest departments, theoretical subspace modeling, led by Director Vren Tallis, and applied resonance engineering, led by Director Shev Okari, had been locked in a jurisdictional dispute over shared laboratory space on Level 9. The dispute was 40 days old. Both departments had filed competing allocation claims. The Standing Committee had reviewed both, found them equally valid, and deadlocked. A secondary committee had been convened. It also deadlocked. A tertiary review was scheduled, but its membership overlapped with the first two panels by 60%, so the prevailing mood was not optimistic. Meanwhile, the Level 9 lab sat empty, sealed under administrative hold. Both departments losing research days. No one talking to anyone who might resolve it, because the system for resolving it was the system that had deadlocked. I knew about this from 3 separate conversations. Drenvoth had mentioned it while replacing a ventilation panel outside my quarters. He serviced both levels, and had been watching the dispute accumulate like sediment. Kalen Driss in the materials lab had mentioned that applied resonance was falling behind on a calibration project because they couldn't access the resonance chamber. And Shen Othis, on Level 11, had mentioned that theoretical subspace was rerouting resource requests through her floor, which was backing up her queue. None of them had told me in confidence. I'd just asked how their week was going, and they'd answered, and I'd listened. Nobody tells you secrets when you ask how their week is going. They tell you logistics. The trick is that logistics, heard from enough angles, occasionally add up to something useful. On what I would call a Tuesday, the Velkashan had a 9-day week, and I'd stopped trying to map it. I was eating in the common meal area on Level 6. Director Vren Tallis sat down across from me. She didn't greet me. She never did. "Morning," I said. "Exchange student Delgado. Tomas." She didn't repeat it. After a pause, she said, "You are known to speak with Director Shev Okari's staff." "I speak with everyone." "Does Shev Okari's department intend to concede the Level 9 allocation?" "I wouldn't know," I said, "but I know from Kalen Driss that they only need the resonance chamber, room 14C. The rest of Level 9 is irrelevant to them. They filed for the full level because Form 7 Theta doesn't have a single room option." Vren Tallis set down her utensil. The faint lavender veins along her jaw went still in a way that I'd learned, over 3 months, meant a Velkashan was recalculating. "Room 14C, she said. That's what he said. She was quiet for 5 or 6 seconds. Then she stood, picked up her tray, and left without another word. The Level 9 hold was lifted that afternoon. Theoretical subspace took the main lab. Applied resonance was granted exclusive access to room 14C under a joint amendment that bypassed the tertiary review entirely. Total resolution time, from my breakfast to both directors signing, 4 hours. I heard about it from Drenvoth, who'd been servicing a recycler on Level 9 when both directors arrived separately, signed the amendment, and departed without speaking to each other. "How did this happen?" he asked me. "Someone mentioned something to someone," I said. He looked at me for a while. "You are the one who talks," he said. "So I'm told." Prefect Anil Shev summoned me 3 days later. I expected another graph. Instead, she sat across her desk with her console closed and her hands folded, and she was quiet for longer than I'd ever seen a Velkashan be quiet in my presence. The level 9 resolution, she said. It originated with an informal verbal exchange. Yours. It originated with Kalen Driss. I just mentioned what he'd said. Over a meal. Over breakfast, I said. She looked at me, the way you'd look at a piece of equipment that turned out to have a function nobody had read the manual for. The Institute's formal mediation process required 41 days and 3 committee cycles to produce deadlock, she said. Your method required 1 meal. I wouldn't call it a method, I said. I just asked how his week was going. Anolshev opened her console, made a note, and closed it again. The following cycle, the Institute introduced what they called informal cross-departmental verbal consultations, voluntary, twice per cycle, held in the common area on level 6. Attendance was optional, but tracked. A subcommittee was formed to study its efficacy. A reporting structure was proposed. They never called it small talk, but I noticed, walking the corridors after that, a few more people said hello. Not many, but a few. It's a start.